Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com. Joined as always by the ambassador, part-time moonlighter for the Florida Bureau of Tourism, but reporter extraordinaire at Horns247.com. The one and only Eric Henry, proud Tampa Catholic graduate. He does it all, ladies and gentlemen. Football, basketball, baseball, softball, whatever it takes. And we are here to enlighten and entertain you for as long as we can. Okay, probably a little under an hour, but we got a lot to get into, as always, here on the Flagship Podcast. We got football. We got men's and women's basketball. We got baseball, softball. And then, of course, the always beloved Take It or Leave It. Before we get into anything, though, please like and subscribe to the Horns247 YouTube channel because that's how we grow. We need your help. And it's also so that you get notifications so that you never miss an episode of the Flagship Podcast here with E. Henry and myself. E. Henry, how you doing?
Chip Brown, it is a lovely, lovely Wednesday morning here. First off, for those of us who are watching in Central Texas, it was a bit weird yesterday, right? With the dust storm or whatever that was. I mean, that was kind of Chip. I mean, you've been here a long time. You ever experienced that? Is that normal?
My power was out for 4 hours yesterday.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
I had some friends in the city who, were down internet, down power. So hopefully those of you in Central Texas watching us, you guys are all squared away. But yeah, outside of that, cannot complain. Like I said, it's back to blue sky here. Beautiful morning. Great time to talk a little Texas athletics.
That's right. Well, last night at the baseball game, Ethan Mendoza led off the game with a home run that would not have gone out of the park normally, but that wind just took it. It's right over right field. So yeah, that was a lot of wind. All right, Eric, we got a lot to get into. Let's start off with some football. Football season never ends around here. We had the NFL Combine over the weekend and some interesting things on the field and off the field as it relates to some comments from Steve Sarkisian. But Eric, we had, an unbelievable performance from Matthew Golden, who was just outstanding. I mean, he followed up a breakthrough season with Texas, 4th and 13. Who's ever going to forget that touchdown reception that Matthew Golden had from Quinn Ewers by running 4.29. 4.29 at the Combine. What'd you think of that?
Here's the thing, right? So I wasn't particularly shocked that Matt ran the time he did because I felt like he could run the time. If you go back to look at this film at Houston, right? And I don't remember off the top of my head if Matt has a track background or not, but he always was a burner. So the fact that he could come out and be the fastest guy didn't surprise me. Did I think that Isaiah Bond, and we'll get to that in a little bit and take it or leave it, right? As far as his performance, did I think that, Matt would be quote unquote that much better than IB? Maybe not. I thought IB might have run, in 4.3s for sure, low 4.3s, but I'm not particularly, stunned or surprised that Matt Golden was unofficial 4.30, then 4.29. I mean, I know my reaction. I was here watching it, just filming it, trying to get a little content. And, I had to cut off the video before I let out a little woo, because I was like, man, 4.3, there you go. But no, I mean, not particularly stunned at all, Chip, in my mind. You take a look at him. I mean, a guy who's always been a tremendous athlete throughout his entire time. And also really quick, I mean, I don't want to get too in the weeds. And let's be clear, Chip. I don't want this being clipped and taken out of context. I am not comparing myself to Matt Golden. But I did run track once upon a time in high school. You can train.
I gotta hear this.
You can train for the 40. Okay. I was not a 100-meter guy. But our track coach knew the strengths and weaknesses, and yours truly was not a 100-meter guy. I needed a little 200, a little more distance. But you can train for the 40 And some guys, are just better. You see this all the time. Some guys play faster in pads on film than they do run the 40, right? And it wouldn't surprise me if maybe IB is one of those guys. Xavier Worthy setting the standard, John Ross prior setting the standard. It's no coincidence. Chris Johnson prior. Chris Johnson out of Orlando. There's me being the ambassador for Florida right there. Chris Johnson, his time was 195 pounds coming out, right? Xavier Worthy, we know what he was, right? That one.
Chris Johnson run 4.28?
4.28. Or it was a 4.2 or 4.26. I can't remember which. Nevertheless, I think it was 4.28. Nevertheless, at a $195, right? John Ross, John Ross was not 200 pounds. Xavier Worthy, well below 200 pounds, right? So that to me is the major thing. And also when you look at Matt Golden, well, I don't know what Matt, came in at, but he played around, 195, 200, right? IB the same thing. So if you're going to get that super fast time, it's usually going to be a smaller guy who can train for it. And, again, those quick starts, things of that nature, those are all things that play a factor. So, we'll get into it and take it or leave it as far as maybe, what the quote unquote poor 40, because let's be real, it wasn't a bad 40 time by IB. If that affects him, the key in my mind, Chip, and this is what I'll pass it back to you on this, is do you believe that Matt Golden played at that speed? I think the answer is yes, but you also train for the 40 and you train to run that type of event.
Yeah. I thought Matt Golden was outstanding. Jaden Blue ran a 4.38 40. But Eric, I got to give some kudos to my man Baron Sorrell, because it seemed like he was the only one who did everything.
Mm.
He ran, he lifted, he did the vertical, the broad. And I think Baron Sorrell's having a really nice off season. The Senior Bowl, being named the defensive lineman of the Senior Bowl. And because I look around at some of the other guys like Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, and they didn't do all the stuff. They didn't run the 40. They didn't do the bench press, which I'm sure they'll do at pro day. But yeah, Baron Sorrell, he did it all. So I give him props for that. Obviously, Quinn Ewers is the hot topic. He went into the combine in some people's eyes as the QB5 in this upcoming draft. And I said going in, I think his stock will just continue to rise because he's smart, he's accurate, he's been through a lot. And then of course the revelation that he had the slight tear of the oblique, and he, in his words, played 2 or 3 games healthy last season. I thought he looked good throwing the ball. The fact that Steve Sarkisian was there talking up Quinn Ewers and some of the other Longhorns is also a nice little recruiting opportunity. But that's what happens. You get invited to talk when you've got 14 players at the combine. I'll let you weigh in before I give you one of my one of the comments that Steve Sarkisian made that really caught my attention.
In relation to Steve being at the combine, Chip?
Or just any of the,
Sure.
Quinn Ewers thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'll start with Quinn. Chip, I don't remember who you took in our roundtable as far as player that we thought would see their stock rise the most.
Makuba, and he measured at less than 190, less than 6 feet. So and Emin Wari from South Carolina at 6'3", 227, ran sub 4.4. So
yeah. So for me, I took Quinn Ewers, and I'm not trying to sit here and sound like Nostradamus, because most times I'm a Nostradamus. But here's the thing, right? It doesn't take a genius to see that Quinn Ewers is going to go out there in t-shirt and shorts and sling the football around. I've said it before, I'll say it again. He was the number 1 recruit in the nation for a reason. He was a guy who, was well sought after for a reason. If you think physically speaking, Quinn can't throw the football when healthy, you're out of your mind, right? Now, let's take this into account, right? There was a certain quarterback, a certain Ohio State quarterback who was ridiculed by social media for saying, "Oh, this guy had the worst combine ever." It does take a bit of a skill to, be able to just throw to guys that you're not used to throwing to, right? Everyone runs their routes differently. Everyone, you're throwing to receivers you're not particularly used to. To me, that is the impressive thing with Quinn's performance out there is he just grabbed the football and just was, slinging it to guys that he didn't really have much of a rapport with, right? To get a little bit of time ahead of time before the drills, maybe toss the ball around here or there, but it's all about you and your arm talent. So I'm not shocked at all that Quinn had the combine he did. As far as Steve Sarkisian, I mean, listen, you can't ask for much more of a recruiting tool than this, right? Come to Texas, we'll put you in the NFL combine, put you in the NFL, right? I mean, you can't ask for more than that. And then to piggyback, kind of tie it all together there, the Matt Golden conversation, the Jaden Blue conversation, the IB, Xavier Worthy. Hey, if you're fast, come to Texas. We recruit speed. You see the speed we recruit, right? Where else would you want to be? So I think that in itself is a major win for Steve Sarkisian, major win for Texas, and major win for the program, Chip.
Yeah. Steve Sarkisian said all the adversity that Quinn Ewers faced at Texas will make him a better pro, the adversity being the injuries that caused him to miss games. Each of his 3 seasons at Texas, having Arch Manning as the backup quarterback. And I thought it was interesting that Steve Sarkisian said, when he was asked about Arch Manning, he said, he got a couple starts. That's great. We're watching him winter workouts. He's becoming a leader of the team. He's got a great personality. His teammates respond to him. But then he said, his physical ability, and talking about Arch Manning, he said, we try to recruit every position at a high level, but as long as he can allow those guys to make their plays, his physical ability will show up. His leadership ability will show up. And then I think we'll be able to use his athleticism. Arch is definitely a really big athletic guy, and that's a different dynamic than we've had over the past couple years. So, Eric, that says to me, and we saw it at the end of last year, that Steve Sarkisian is willing to get out of his comfort zone, use Arch Manning's legs. But we were thinking, is that because, Quinn's injured? Is that because Quinn's injured only situation? Or is this going to be a thing? And it sounds like, at least right now, it's going to be a thing that Arch Manning's legs will be incorporated. That is something that Steve Sarkisian has been reluctant to do. He's on the record saying, we're a pro style offense. Don't want the quarterback taking unnecessary hits. Your thoughts?
Chip, I just was doing this on the fly, right? And if off the top of your head, feel free to jump in. Is Jake Locker the quarterback that's run for the most yards as a quarterback in Steve Sarkisian, right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, because I looked at it. Casey Thompson, tops was like a 150 something, right? So it wasn't, even though he's an athlete, wasn't someone that primarily was used as a runner. Jake Locker.
Remember, he inherited Washington.
I was going to say, you beat me to the punch. Say, to bring the audience in here, Jake Locker's freshman year playing for old Tyrone Willingham ran for just under 1,000 yards. Steve Sarkisian gets him, and in his, Jake Locker's best 2 years, tops about 300, 350. Now, he turned Jake Locker into a first-round pick, right? That's the old Jake Locker, Christian Ponder, EJ Manuel. No disrespect to those guys, but you know what I'm saying there. So there's that. But no, I do think it's interesting, right? Because if you're thinking you're going to have a quarterback who's going to run for 600-700 yards, it's not the case. I think they'll be selective. And also, listen, Chip, I don't remember those Washington teams off the top of my head. I don't know how many how many yards Jake Locker lost to sack yardage, right? So I don't remember if those offensive lines played a factor there. Ideally, Texas will have a really strong offensive line, and Arch won't be losing too many yards to sacks, right? So maybe in that sense, he can top those numbers. But no, Steve Sarkisian has been adamant about it, and I think it's going to be real interesting because every time I'm asked about this, if I do radio hits wherever it may be, they asked, hey, Arch, the legs, he's not Peyton, he's not Eli. What's that going to look like? And I have to kind of, be the, the wet blanket on people and say, hey, he's not going to run 20 times, right? That's never going to be Steve Sarkisian's offense. Could I see a combination of designed runs and maybe some improvising on Arch's part that gets you to, 5 to 8, 6 to 9 attempts per game, right? Sure. I think that's reasonable. And Arch has shown, Chip, look at UTSA. All he needs is one. All he needs is one, and he can take one the distance, right? So we'll see what those numbers look like. But yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. Real quick, Chip, before I pass it back to you, I just want to shout out to people who are watching us. Appreciate those watching on YouTube. Stan's dad, Chris Bennett, Champ Bailey 3. Thank you for watching with us. But yeah, Chip, that's kind of where I land there with the Arch and the legs dynamic.
Yeah. Well, the other comment that Steve Sarkisian made, I thought was interesting. Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network, former NFL scout, brought up Bo Nix as a quarterback who probably benefited from facing adversity in college at Auburn and then transferring to Oregon. And then Nix, of course, had a really good rookie season with the Denver Broncos. And Sarkisian responded by saying that he evaluated Nix. He evaluated Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams along with Quinn Ewers when Texas signed Ewers as a transfer from Ohio State. And the quote from Steve Sarkisian was, quote, I evaluated all those guys because remember, we were in the market for a transfer guy at that time. So Quinn was a transfer, Bo Nix was a transfer, Jaden Daniels was a transfer, Caleb Williams was a transfer, all the same year. And so we evaluated all those guys. And then he says, and I think Jaden would sit here and tell you that year he had at Arizona State was not a great year for him. And then he goes to LSU and lights it up, and he's a Heisman winner. And now he's doing what he's doing as a rookie with the Commanders. But just interesting that Steve Sarkisian admitted that, we knew Caleb Williams was going to go to USC. He was going to follow his head coach, Lincoln Riley. But Jaden Daniels, interesting.
Chip, I don't think Steve is out of bounds on that because it's a fact, right?
Oh yeah, but I think it's interesting that
they revealed it.
Yeah, and he probably wasn't looking at the legs factor as much.
But Chip,
Daniels ended up running for 1,500 yards and throwing for 3,000. Now I get it. He had 10 interceptions and 10 touchdown passes at Arizona State. Not great.
Yeah.
Not great.
Yeah. This is what I'll say, right? We just talked about kind of the fit for Steve Sarkisian's offense, and maybe the legs factor wasn't something that was evaluated, or maybe it was evaluated and said, hey, that isn't necessarily the way I want to run my offense. What I was going to say is, I think one of the most revisionist history clips, while I thought it was silly, and it was silly and immature, but that's what 19, 20, 21-year-old kids do when they took the trash bag to Jaden Daniels' locker and were throwing stuff out, right? Like, it was silly, but also revisionist history is to act like that's the same Jaden Daniels, because it wasn't. Right. It wasn't. So, right. Yeah, that's kind of my take there.
Yeah. Also, and I know you touched on this, and we don't need to spend a ton of time on it, but Cam Newton going after Texas's culture, I thought was one of the weirdest takes, kind of, and you said it in your 4 downs column, and everyone needs to go read Eric's 4 downs column, which comes out on Wednesdays when we record the pod. So a good reason to get over to Horns247. But him going after Texas's culture and saying that it's all because they have money, NIL money, that doesn't add up. Anyone who saw the Texas A&M recruiting class of 2023 not amount to anything, or 2022, number 1 recruiting class of all time, according to the rankings, and it didn't equate to wins. It didn't equate to Jimbo Fisher keeping his job, Eric.
Chip, I won't spend too much time on it. Most of my points I made in the 4 downs column, so go there, check it out. Here's a point I didn't make. Chip, do you know, and I know, you know, because you're, a smart college football guy, but you know how many NFL players Cam Newton played with on that 2011 or no 2010 national championship team at Auburn?
How many NFL players?
3. On offense, he only played with 1. An offensive lineman, offensive tackle, I forget his name, went in the 7th round. Nick Fairley, of course, was a first-round pick. But Cam, right? I make that point to say this. It's short-sighted of Cam to say that, because he, better than anyone else, should understand that a force of nature, someone who was a culture changer, can come in. Cam spent 1 year at Auburn. A culture changer, a force of nature can come in and change everything. That was the team he played on. I'm not disrespecting that Auburn Tigers team, but he didn't play with that team. Didn't send 14 guys to the combine. Okay. So he, better than anyone else, should understand that, yeah, you can have all the talent in the world sometimes, but you know what can make up for that in a way, because of course you have to have talent, is just a culture changer, a force of nature like he was. So that to me, I just felt was short-sighted. But, you know, we're talking about Cam 14, 15 years later and removed from that. And he is, as his own words, someone who viewed himself as not just a quarterback, but an entertainer and an icon. I think that was more entertainer Cam than anything else.
Yeah. Okay. We didn't spend a ton of time on Dwayne Aquina coming back as the, to coach in the secondary of the Longhorns. He was headed to Texas as an analyst, and then he ended up being the replacement for Johnny Nansen as the defensive coordinator at Arizona. A year later, Terry Joseph moves on to the New Orleans Saints, and Dwayne Aquina is ready to come back. And he's 68 years old, but anyone who's been around Dwayne Aquina knows he's got more energy than an entire, some team's entire coaching staff. He's passionate. He loves to help guys reach their best. That matters to him. I think some coaches are kind of going through the motion, and I'm not to say that they don't care, but they just have their ways of teaching. And why aren't you doing it exactly the way I'm teaching you? Whereas Dwayne Aquina, like every great coach, looks to communicate in a way that each guy is going to understand it and accentuate what that guy does. And when you get guys like Michael Griffin, Cedric Griffin, Quandre Diggs, Aaron Williams, Rod Babers, all these guys swear by Dwayne Aquina and credit him with putting Texas back in the discussion of being a DBU, not the DBU. That's a little hard to, it's hard to put right on one school, but you want to be in the conversation as a DBU, Eric. And of course, Dwayne Aquina was a part of the golden decade, I call it, of Texas football, the first decade of the 2000s, when they, should have played for a national championship in 2001, lost to a Colorado team they'd beaten 42-7 earlier in the year in the Big 12 championship game. They would have won the right to go face that buzzsaw Miami Hurricanes team that some say is the greatest of all time. And they did win the national championship in 2005, and of course played for another one in 2009. Dwayne Aquina was a part of all of it. So I like this hire because the players who he helped send, 15 of them to the NFL, they love the hire. So good for Steve Sarkisian, in my mind. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Quick thought there. Again, I would have loved to have seen that Texas team versus Miami, because I am on the record saying that was the greatest college football team of all time. But nevertheless, I think you summed it up real well. So I'll just add a quick thought. Obviously, you covered Texas, so you've been around Dwayne Aquina and understand that. Just quick thoughts around the age, because I saw some people, on the boards and some of the chatter being like, oh, well, that was, 10, 12, 15 years ago, so on and so forth. What has he done recently? At 68, so on and so forth. I'll say this quickly, and I may have referenced this before on the show. My time around Butch Davis at FIU really redefined the way I look at age, because Coach Davis was 70 in his last year. And that guy, underneath the hot Florida sun, humidity, you couldn't tell who was the 70-year-old versus the 21-year-old, okay, out there covering FIU. So for anyone who thinks that age is just this, factor, says, oh, can he do this? Can he relate? Is he, past his prime, anything like that? I don't look at that at all. Even from the clips I've seen, I've watched a couple interviews of him. Sounds like a guy who, is going to be that guy, going to be 80, 85 years old and can still bring it. So I think his resume speaks for itself. His pedigree speaks for itself, and really interested to see how he works with a talented group of Texas DBs.
Yeah. And Neil Brown is coming to Texas to be a special assistant to Steve Sarkisian. This follows in line with Gary Patterson coming to Texas for a year. Paul Christ, the former Wisconsin head coach, coming to Texas for a year. Neil Brown's a guy who has always wanted to, and has, I think, successfully run the football. And I think Neil Brown's a really good coach. Now, did he have the best coordinators? And did he miss on a couple of quarterbacks? I mean, I think he finally got it right with Garrett Green, but it was kind of too little too late. Nonetheless, Neil Brown, look, he was in the mix for other jobs, just like Gary Patterson was. Wake Forest, he was in the mix. I think he was second in that job search. And he's decided, you know what, I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to go swap some ideas with Steve Sarkisian. Everyone wants to see how Texas does it. Everyone wants to see how they recruit. Everyone wants to see how they approach NIL and the transfer portal. So I like this. I like Neil Brown. He's still got a lot of good coaching left in him. And who knows, Eric? Could we see Jaheim White, the freshman All-American?
Yeah.
Speedster.
Yeah.
Jaden Blue. Possible replacement. We won't know that till the transfer portal in April 16th through the 25th. But your thoughts?
Well, Chip, to your point about Jaheim White, who else is in Austin by any chance?
His former running backs coach.
We're not reporting anything. We're just drawing the natural tea leaves. That's all. No, I'm going to take kind of the 10,000 foot view here on this, because I think you outlined everything real well on Neil Brown. What I love about this is used to be this guy, great coach, won a ton of national championships, who would take in former head coaches who maybe needed, a little time away from being a head coach or a coordinator or a position coach, learn a thing or two. Oh yeah, that guy's name was Nick Saban, right? One of Steve Sarkisian's mentors. Love to see that here with the Longhorns. I think it's a great move. And I think in my mind, Chip, and we've talked about this a bit when we talked about some of the coaching transition, right? With some of the position coaches who have now graduated out and taken different jobs. When you're running a successful program, it's going to be places where talented coaches, good coaches, young coaches, et cetera, want to come and learn, right? And I think this is kind of evidence here with Neil Brown. So that's kind of the 10,000 foot view on it for me, because I don't think it's going to be the last we see, as long as Texas is having success. And Steve Sarkisian is, I mean, Chip, how the love affair that Kenny Dillingham had with Steve Sarkisian, right? Remember how well he talked about if you're a year behind Steve Sarkisian, that means you're like 10 years ahead of everybody else, right? So I don't think it's going to be the last time you see this.
Yeah. Eventful stuff. All right. Anything else on football before we move on to a little Texas baseball?
Yeah, I think pretty well covered it.
Okay. So Texas baseball last night, I was at the dish for Texas versus Texas A&M Corpus Christi while Eric was covering Rodney Terry and the boys making one last stand, possibly in Starkville, Mississippi. But real quick on baseball, they've won 10 straight. They are an offensive machine. They've scored 50 runs in their last 4 games. They've had at least one 7-run inning in each of their last 4 games. They fell behind Illinois 6-1 on Sunday. What'd they do? 14 unanswered runs for a 15-6 win. The offense is there, Eric, and obviously it won't continue like that in the SEC. Let's get that straight. But what is more important is the pitching roles. We know Jared Spencer's the Friday guy. We know Luke Harrison is the crafty lefty Saturday guy. But this Sunday against Santa Clara, you're going to see left-handed freshman Dylan Volantis, who is 1-0 with a sub-2 ERA, 1.86 ERA, who is 6'6" and throws over the top of his head. And it's an arm angle you don't see very often. And he's got a curveball that everybody talks about. So that's going to be fun and interesting because Cade Bing, the lefty sophomore transfer from McLennan Community College, is a strike thrower, but he struggled with the atmosphere at Globe Life in his first start. Pitched pretty well against Dartmouth, but then a lot of free passes this past weekend. Hit 3 batsmen. I think he's hit 6 batsmen in 3 starts, but Dylan Volantis, and some people were talking about Max Grubbs. He was the Friday starter for Texas last year at the end of the season. And I think Jim Schlossnagle likes Max Grubbs right where he is. He's the fireman. If they get in a bases loaded jam and he needs a guy to come in and handle it, Max Grubbs. And so this will be interesting because Sark has said, I don't know about putting freshmen up against that SEC, those batting lineups, but hey, if Dylan Volantis gets in trouble, that's what Max Grubbs is for, Eric. So they're 10-1. They're number 12 in the country. They're not fielding it great. They're down to they came into last night's game at 963, which is 188th of 299 teams. Now they're down to 961 because they had a couple errors, including an error that allowed 5 runs to score. When my man Easton Winfield dropped a fly ball in left field. The winds were kind of weird, but still, that was for the 3rd out of the inning. And then A&M Corpus Christi ends up scoring 5 runs in that inning. And he was promptly replaced by Tommy Farmer the 4th. But I like the direction, Eric, is what I'm saying, of where things are going with this Texas baseball team. Because I think with Max Ballou, Will Gasparino, Jalen Flores, Ryan Galvan, the catcher, you got anchors in that dugout and in that lineup who are salty veterans who are all about that so what next pitch philosophy that you wrote about earlier. And I think it's moving in the right direction. Obviously, the competition is coming. Texas will open SEC play at Mississippi State on March 14th. Your thoughts?
I smiled there for a second because you said that Sark is hesitant to put freshmen up there, and obviously you meant Jim Schlossnagle. But listen, if you want proof that football never dies, I called Rodney Terry during non-conference play. Steve started to end a post game. I said, Steve. Oh wait. I caught myself there. So you want proof that football never dies around the 40 acres. You got it from the two of us. No, on a serious note, I think you did a great job covering everything. I will say this, right? I do think in terms of Max Grubbs, definitely like him personally. I like him in that role in coming out of the bullpen. I think that to me, he himself, Ruger Riojas, really interested to kind of see how that comes along. What I'm looking to see, Chip, and again, you're starting to see little bits and pieces here or there. He did a great job outlining, some of the arms. They call themselves outgetters, right? Not starters, relievers. Max Weiner, the former FIU Panther pitching coach for Texas Longhorns. Outgetters, right? I'm interested to see just kind of how everything comes together. So I think you've seen it in moments, Chip, right? You've seen the bats come along. What's it, 55 runs over the past how many?
50.
50? Okay. There you go, right? So you've seen the bats come alive. In moments, you've seen the arms look dominant, right? But you just kind of want to see it all come together before SEC play, because that's when it gets real, right? This is for anyone who may not be familiar, and I'm sure most of our audience is, but for those who aren't, this is the way the SEC is talked about in football, you're getting it in baseball, and probably more, Chip, because you had, oh man, I published it earlier this week, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I think we'll say it was 9. No, it might have been 12. I think it was 12 SEC teams amongst the top 25 in the coaches poll, right? So that should tell you the strength of the Southeastern Conference when it comes to baseball. So just want to see them put it all together. As Jim said before the season, you don't get spring training, right? You get you get the alumni game, you get your practices, and then you're off to the races, right? So in a way, not that these games don't count, because they do, but in a way, this is going to be the tune-up for SEC play, where a bad series or two can snowball, and Jim knows it. He's had success at A&M, right? So he understands the grind of the SEC play. But these players, it's going to hit them, and I think that'll be interesting to see, because again, I mean, out of what, a 16-team league, you got 3/4 of the league that could beat you on any given night, right? Or I guess excluding Texas, 11, right? So that's going to be interesting. But this upcoming series, definitely going to be against Santa Clara this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Want to see how they fare, because you said SEC play starts in the middle of this month.
Yeah. And if Dylan Volantis is really good on Sunday, look for him to stay there. And they'll have Max Grubbs ready if Volantis runs into trouble. But Volantis is a strike throwing machine, and that's been very impressive. And Jason Flores, who has been the Tuesday night starter, is a guy who throws strikes. He's got really good stuff. He's a power pitcher, but he doesn't throw as many strikes as Dylan Volantis. And I think that was the tipping point for Volantis to get that nod as the Sunday starter this weekend. We'll see how that plays out. And Eric, I don't know how many of our listeners are paying attention to what's going on at Texas A&M, who opened the season at number 1. The Aggies are now 6-5, and I get it. Gavin Grahovic, they're all SEC freshmen. Last year's out with a shoulder injuries, done for the year, but you've still got a lot of really good players on that team. And Jim Schlossnagel got the Longhorns at 10-1, and they're an offensive juggernaut, at least right now. I mean, I think the most old school Texas baseball fans are sitting there going, damn, these guys can score runs, and they usually do it right after the other team makes their move. I mean, Illinois, give them credit. It was a windy day. They took advantage. They're hitting home runs. They're up 6-1. Texas, the next inning, scores 4 and then gets that crooked 7-run inning a couple frames later. So, yeah, good stuff so far from Texas baseball. And real quick on Texas softball, they won the Longhorn Invitational over the weekend. Tegan Cavan kind of got back on track after giving up 6 runs on 7 hits in that loss to Stanford a week earlier. She got back on track, and Mac Morgan, who was really good the weekend before, had a little bit of a struggle, but they've got so many pitchers. Citlali Gutierrez, they can pick each other up. And offensively, Caden Henry, wow. We knew she was good as a freshman last year, but she is just ripping the cover off the ball. So Texas softball, number 1 or number 2, depending on which poll you're looking at. Oklahoma, right there as usual. Eric, any thoughts before we move on to basketball?
Let's move on, because we got plenty to get to with both the men and the women.
Well, let's get the women out of the way, because they are the regular season co-champs of the SEC. But Eric, they are the number 2 seed in the SEC women's basketball tournament.
The most ridiculous coin flip ever, Chip. I'm sorry. You finish and I'll rant.
Yeah, I mean, so they win a share of the regular season crown. They beat Florida. They're 15-1 in league play. They're 29-2. And remember, they didn't have Layla Filia, who was supposed to be a starter for this team, the Michigan transfer who averaged more than 16 points per game last year, a first-team All Big Ten player. She has a detached retina, needs more eye surgery. So she's been a non-factor here this season. And Aaliyah Moore, their senior power forward, who's been a big-time toughness player for them, who's had knee issues. She's been out the last half of the conference season. And they still go 29-2, 15-1. And Vic Schaefer clinches that share of the regular season crown on his birthday. But then, Eric, the coin toss, because South Carolina and Texas were tied at 15-1 and they split their regular season meetings. Greg Sankey did this goofy coin toss. I'll let you take it from here.
Not that Greg Sankey cares about my thoughts, Chip. But if he did, I would give him a piece of my mind. First off, the coin toss itself, come on, that's really how we're deciding this, right? There weren't any other statistical factors to decide this between two teams, not any of them.
Okay, South Carolina would say, if we do it by margin of victory, the two-game combined margin of victory, because they beat Texas by 17 in Columbia. Texas beat them by 4 in Austin. What
Chip, there could have been a multitude of ways to do this, right? That felt, and listen, I don't want to throw another league under the bus, so I won't mention one by name, but I spent 7 years covering Group of Fives. That felt very Group of Five-esque in terms of ways you would decide something. That's the first thing. Second thing, if we are going to do a coin toss, Chip, you let the coin hit the ground. All right? Like, what is this? Everyone knows. You don't toss the coin up and then catch it and flip it over. What?
I agree with that.
What? And I'm not upset that Texas lost, right? I just thought the way they did it was goofy. Like you said,
right.
There's no better way to describe it other than goofy. So if you are going to do a coin toss, you throw the coin up, you let it hit the ground. I know it probably doesn't make for the best TV in the world. Just have whoever is shooting you, pan down so we can see it, and you figure that out. But this, and then Sankey, I've been practicing it for 2 hours. Does it get 2 hours to practice how to flip a coin up and catch it? Come on. So,
and it looked like he, could see it. I don't know. I'm with you. Let it hit the ground. We'll pan down and see for ourselves.
So that's my
because it's significant, Eric. It's significant. If you're the 2 seed, you're now in the same bracket with LSU, and I get it. Flagship Johnson is out with shin inflammation, and she's a big time player. But LSU has 3 players on the first, second, third team, all SEC. Texas has 1. Like LSU, they're super talented. I don't know what's going on. Sometimes they're hot as a pistol. Sometimes they're, cold as ice. But that was a hell of a game between LSU and Texas. And so was the Ole Miss game. Texas came back in that game. Taylor Jones was outstanding. They won it 61-58 in Oxford. But Ole Miss is playing better now than they were then. Texas has those 2 teams. South Carolina has Oklahoma and Kentucky. Texas went to Kentucky and beat the Wildcats by double digits. Those are tougher matchups for Texas against LSU and Ole Miss. So my 2 cents.
There you have it. And Chip, the last thing I'll say before we transition to the men is, and I've kind of alluded to this, on previous episodes. I really wish we could get Texas and South Carolina one more time on a neutral floor, Chip. We're not going to get it because the SEC tournament is in Greenville, South Carolina. But I don't know your thoughts. My feeling is this. I think you take any of the top 5 teams, maybe top 6, USC, UCLA, Texas, LSU, South Carolina, Notre Dame, and you match them up 1 versus 6, or however you want to pair them on a neutral floor, any team can win. That's my opinion.
Well, and hopefully you'll be at the women's Final Four in the great state of Florida, in your hometown of Tampa. Come on, ladies. Help my man Eric out. Take him home.
Chip Brown loves Tampa too. He was there this summer. He was there to watch his Lions, to watch his Detroit Lions. So
yeah, that is a favorite spot. My grandparents lived in St. Pete. I went to that Alabama Clemson.
Oh yeah.
National championship game there. Raymond James. It was amazing. That was the game that Steve Sarkisian was calling the offense because Lane Kiffin took the Florida Atlantic job, and looked like Jalen Hurts had won the game with 1:07 left, but Deshaun Watson, whoop, whoop, whoop. Hunter Renfrow. Yeah. Pick play. All right, let's get to the men's basketball team, Eric, because they've been terrible. They lost 6 of 7. They let Georgia come into their house and kick over their furniture and take their women and children, and they look lifeless. They lost in a horrible way. They were down 23 in that game. Ugh. But then they go to Starkville, ranked Mississippi State. They tried to give it away at the end, Eric, with the worst inbounds play of all time. But by God, they won. The Texas men win in overtime. I guess the quote in your story from Dexter Pittman about you got to play with a chip on your shoulder. Maybe that's sunk in. I thought that was Rodney Terry's job to get the guys to play with a chip on their shoulder. But hey, they won. Your thoughts?
Chip, remind me that Chris Webber, Michigan, that wasn't an inbounds play, right? That was okay. All right. Because
some guy on his bench was like, call timeout.
That's right. Because I was going to say it was right up there with that, folks. Listen, it was a game that, believe it or not, some people are kind of flabbergasted that we're still talking NCAA tournament with this team. It's because of the strength of the SEC. That's the reason why. Texas, in a game they had to have, they went into Starkville, left the hump with a victory in overtime after leading by as many as 11 points in the second half. That's a game, Chip, that, listen, I'm not going to take anything away from Texas's win, but Josh Hubbard, typically a much more efficient scorer than that. Mississippi State's diminutive guard, listed at 5'11", probably closer to 5'9", $180. Averages 17 a night. Ended the game with, I believe, 13, but it was on 3 of 12 shooting. I had I believe 9 of 10 from the line, so it may have been like 16. But again, it didn't.
It was 16. 3 of 12 shooting, 9 of 10 from the free throw line. Right,
but didn't shoot well. So you're not going to get that type of outing often from Hubbard, right? RJ Melendez had opportunities. A kid from Orlando, Riley Keegle, had some opportunities. They just couldn't make their shots. Texas, on the flip side, Tremont Mark, right? How many times have we talked about T. Mark, wondering what's going on with him? I just think if you look at him, Chip, and we've had this discussion before, he opened the year banged up with the groin. Then, he gets the knee injury. He's been struggling with injuries all year. I think it's been a little bit inconsistent because of the role he's asked. I wrote this, that him, Jordan Pope, Jason Kent, Julian Larry, all minutes down from last year. Shot attempts down from last year when they were playing different roles for their previous schools. It's clear that they aren't necessarily guys who can be more efficient with less, right? Now, I will say this. Jason Kent's starting to come on a little bit, right? Maybe he's a little healthier from the wrist injury. We'll see what happens. But the reason we're still talking NCAA tournament is if Texas can pick up a 7th league win against Oklahoma on Saturday and then head to Nashville, and I'll be there, Music City, Bridgestone Arena. If they can pick up an 8th and a 9th win in the tournament, that would get them, off the top of my head, to right around 17, 18. I'll get them to 20. They can get 2 wins in the SEC tournament. Then there's a real conversation about this team making the big dance. What does that do for the future of Texas men's basketball? We'll see. That's still a wait and see thing. But as far as the immediate future, they still have an opportunity to go dancing, Chip. And, listen, I think through 29, 30 games, we know what this team is, right? They haven't shown any consistency enough for you to kind of believe that there's some surge coming. We had the same conversation about the team last year, right? About when are they going to gel with the transfers? But here's the wild card. When you got a guy like Trey Johnson, who you just give him a little bit of daylight, Chip, and his stroke is so smooth, man. Like that shot, he gets it off, and it looks good every time the ball leaves Trey's hands, you think it's going in, right? You get him hot, and you never know what can happen. But it was a game they needed to have. They had it. They've had plenty of games that they needed to have before, and they haven't had it. So give them credit there, but they have to win. They cannot drop one against Oklahoma, an Oklahoma team that, I mean, I wouldn't say they're, fighting for the NCAA tournament lives. They're probably on the still, same plane as Texas, right? Very much on the outside looking in, but they're still playing for something. So we'll see what happens come Saturday, Chip.
I mean, both teams, Texas and OU, playing for their coaches' jobs, essentially. Oklahoma is 17-12, 4-12 in SEC play. Texas is 17-13, 6-11 in SEC play. But yeah, Texas has to win at home. I mean, you have to win at home, especially this time of year. All right, we'll get into it in Take It or Leave It, because we're not quite done with that thought. Eric, you ready for some Take It or Leave It?
I am ready for some Take It or Leave It, Chip. And This time you are leading off. You're batting to me, or you're pitching to me.
Okay. All right. Take it or leave it. Numero uno. Eric, Isaiah Bond hurt himself at the NFL Combine by predicting a 4.20 40 and running a 4.39. Take it or leave it.
Full stop, leave it. I saw some comments that said, 4.39, when did that become a bad time? Well, I will say this. It's not that it's a bad time, Chip, because remember back in the day, 4.4 was the standard. It's just that more guys are running 4.4s and 4.3s, right? So 4.4 used to be that, all right, you're a blazer, you're faster than everybody else. It's not necessarily the case now. It's elite speed, but you're not necessarily just burning everyone on the field. However, it's still, if you come out around a 4.5, it's a different conversation, right? But he ran a 4.39. I don't think he hurt himself. I appreciate him, having some faith in himself, but it didn't work out. Move on, to me, in my mind. That's my take, Chip.
Yeah. I will leave this as well. I do love that Xavier Worthy, who is plenty petty, we know that from when he declared to go to the NFL and he showed all the tweets in his video of those who were ripping him. So he took to Instagram to humble Isaiah Bond and said, respect those who come before you. He said, there's fast, then there's me. So, way to go, Xavier Worthy, who's on a roll. All right, Eric, take it or leave it. Number 2.
Sorry, I couldn't help but laugh. I love the idea. 21-year-old Xavier Worthy telling 20-year-old Isaiah Bond, respect those. I couldn't. I had to get a laugh at that. Take or leave it. Number 2. The NCAA tournament committee is looking for reasons to put Texas in the field because of one, Trey Johnson. Take it or leave it.
I mean, I'm inclined to take this because it's about TV ratings, folks. CBS has the rights to the men's tournament. That money funds the entire NCAA. So they want their NCAA tournament to look as good as possible. And when you've got a top 10, 11 scorer in the nation, and a guy like Eric just said is so smooth and is going to be in the association next year, yeah, you probably have a little bit of a, okay, all things equal, man, Trey Johnson sure would be good in the tournament. But these Longhorns have to give the committee more than that, because they can't just ignore resume and look for reasons to put a, highlight reel scorer in the tournament. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but I would say if Texas beats OU and it's, they maybe win a game in the tournament. I mean, right now, before last night, we were like, it's over, it's gone, it's done. And it it might still be over, gone, done. Because, well, I'll defer to you on that, Eric, but I'm inclined to take this because the committee, I think at the end of the day, does think about TV ratings. Your thoughts?
Chip, I'm going to take it. And our guy, Chris Bennett, noted it. And it was kind of a thought of mine too, that Trae Young got in the tournament with an OU team that I don't remember what their record was off the top of my head, but I know it wasn't great. Right. I know there could have been I know there were mid-major teams that were left out that could have easily gotten in over that OU team. So there's certainly some validity to that for sure, in the sense that, hey, like you said, this is an event. It's a big money event. A lot of people eyeballs, right? Let's get Trey Johnson. Let's get a guy that we can say, hey, this is going to be a top 5 pick in the NBA draft. I believe that for sure. In terms of, where the stands with Texas basketball, I mean, it's an uphill climb. It's an uphill climb all the way around. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You just take a look at the trajectory of the program over the last 2 years. Reasons for that, we'll get into that probably in a later episode. Won't go, belabor the point too long. But yeah, it's an uphill climb, put to you that way. But it starts with winning against Oklahoma, and it starts with, finding a way to get some consistency out of this team, because that's the only way this discussion is going to be real as far as the NCAA tournament committee. The NCAA tournament committee is going to need reasons, but they can't just do all the work for them. So that's the big thing more than anything else, Chip.
And I did like seeing Tremont Mark handling the point at the end of that game. Like to see a little bit more of that. To just let's see how Tremont Mark and Trey Johnson can play off of each other and not leave the ball handling decisions to Jordan Pope or Julian Larry. Let the two alphas work their game together, but we'll come back to that. All right, take it or leave it. Number 3, Eric. Number 1 ranked Texas women's basketball will win the SEC tournament this week in Greenville, South Carolina. Take it or leave it.
I'm going to leave it, Chip. It's not that I don't think they aren't talented enough and or capable enough. Maddie Booker just took home a slew of awards, right? So there's that.
SEC Player of the Year and Vic Schaefer SEC Coach of the Year.
Correct. And the award's going to continue for Maddie. I'm just sticking firm with my belief that I think if this tournament were held in Birmingham, Alabama, I think Texas wins. It's going to be a home game, right? And like I said, LSU might have something to say about this overall in terms of getting a rematch between Texas and South Carolina. But if it is a rematch, it's going to be a home game. And I don't know. It would show me a lot from this Texas team if they can win that one. But I'm sticking firm with my belief that neutral floor, it's anyone's ball game. If you got to go play a de facto road game, I give the edge to South Carolina, Chip.
Yeah. I'm going to take this. Now, here's why. And this is a kind of against all odds situation here, because when people talk about South Carolina, they don't really talk about Bree Hall, who is an outstanding perimeter defender who's going to face guard Madison Booker. That's if Texas can get through all the minefield that they have leading up to it, Ole Miss, LSU. This is going to require someone else to help. And I think it's got to be the combination of Jordan Lee and Brianna Preston. That's how you got through the LSU game. If Vic trusts those young guns to play in the big show, again, he should. He absolutely should. Then I think Texas can win this tournament. If he doesn't, probably not. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that, and I'll take it. All right, kids, thanks for listening to this episode of the Flagship Podcast. We'll see you over at horns247.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Horns247 YouTube channel and become an annual member at horns247.com so you don't miss a thing. For Eric Henry, I'm Chip Brown, Until next time, stay safe and keep the faith.